Hello, good evening, everybody. Welcome to another stream. Today, this is our third and final prelude to Wagner Day, which you've just seen an advert of. One of the things with Richard Wagner is that his work and his prose writings really question the purpose of art, the role of it within for the individual human being, for society at large, what it can reveal to us about the artistic process in general, and many other questions to do with the value of art. And so that got me to thinking, well, he actually raises a broader question then about the purpose and um, the importance of artistic endeavor within our lives. And I thought it'd be a good idea to maybe wrestle with some of these questions in a broader setting. And to do that, I have one of the most wonderful guests. I've been a long admirer of him. It is, of course, Mr. John D. Hello, Mr. D. How are you doing, sir?
Hello, I'm doing well. Thank you for having me, Mr. Hood.
Oh, it's a pleasure. It's a pleasure. For those who might not know you, could you say a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, I am a currently a parasitic cuckoo who lives in academic agent's nest. So that's usually where, if you should choose to hear me, you will hear me as co-host of his show, You Popular Opinions. But in reality, I am a professional artist, which I've been for uh, quite a few years now, and so that is what occupies my time when I'm not on UO and not wasting my time on Twitter. So yeah.
Well, and one of the things is that actually on Academic Agents channel and many other channels which you've been a guest on, you've spoken a lot about various different arts and the history of art and so on as well. And so not just the visual art, but you've done streams on David Bowie, for example. So
Yes.
like
Yeah.
you've got quite an expansive knowledge about the history of art in a very broad sense, I guess.
Yes. I mean, I've always been I was been an artistic or slash aesthetic type, and in fact, I would again to sort of bring up a connection to Wagner and the subject. People may be aware of this concept of the total work of art. What's the word? Gesamtkunstwerk.
That's it,
Uh,
yeah.
I'm not a German speaker, uh, so you have to excuse the pronunciation. But this idea that that a work of art can be kind of totalizing, that it can be it can sort of invoke the participation of all the senses, and sort of a totality of vision. So, and I even in my own artwork, I don't have particular medium. I have done artwork in many different media, and so yeah, yes, it's always been. I've always had a kind of more Catholic view of what is involved in art, what constitutes a work of art. So yeah, but my expertise is really more in the visual arts. As I said to you, I just consider myself a total casual when it comes to to classical music, but of course I love it and have followed it deeply for most of my life. So.
I want to pick up on something you said there about a more Catholic view of art, and what struck me when I was trying to think through what would be the best parallels for understanding total art today. One of them would be a religious service like a Catholic mass, but perhaps for most people, something like the coronation
Mm.
that we saw would be a good example of that, where you have um, there's verse, there's prose, I guess. There's the costumes are all ornately decorated with all these props as well. You have music going on in the background while there's various gestures taking place. That to me, and as we might come to, there's serious commentary upon, or a revelation of the people who belong to that nation taking place through that ceremony. So in a way, that kind of thing, we can look at it for its historical significance, but it also can be seen as an artistic work in its own right.
Most certainly, and of course, the dual meaning of Catholic. I mean, just in the sense of universal. Okay, from the Greek, I would suspect. And then to a very specific meaning, of the Roman Catholic Church, which I have been a member since, since childhood. But yes, this idea that all of the kind of senses, that this sort of theater, if you will, is involved in specifically, the worship of God, or in the sake of, or in the case of the coronation, this a ritual that is meant to invoke history. It is meant to be a solemn religious ceremony with the anointing of a monarch, and it's also, as you say, to draw in the kind of spirit of the kingdom, and all of the subjects of the monarch. So, and yes, and I think we are we're sensual beings in the world. We drink in with our eyes, and with our ears, and we touch, and we taste, and we smell, and all of those components are part of, the coronation, or part of, a great work of theater, a great work of music, and I think very important. I think I think to sort of touch all of those things at once, can be a revelatory experience. So.
Well, I remember when the Queen died, and there was the processions and so on, and you had men crying in the streets who had never been moved in relation to the monarchy before. But there was something about those ceremonies, and I think you're right that it's stimulating the senses in connection with all these other meanings in a way that most people don't experience in modern life, or if they do, it's in a very different form. Something like cinema, which we can come on to how that's used and so on today, but it was a revelatory moment for many people. It kind of awoke something in them that had been covered over uh, by materialistic thinking, or pragmatism, or whatever you want to call it.
Yes, and it sort of reminds me of a phrase that Academic Agent likes to quote from, I believe, Jonathan Bowden, which is this idea of getting beneath the mind, a sort of to get at sort of deeper, more primal aspects of human experience. I mean, it's difficult for, it's almost as if the contemporary material world is constituted in a way that is meant to keep us from accessing the sacred, keep us from accessing these deep rivers. And I mean, I think that great artists, part of their responsibility in a way, or part of their kind of, their journey is to try to lead people to these deep waters that flow under the surface of all of the things that now, tell us that that all of those things are outmoded. That the modern man does not need this, and of course that's a terrifying idea. To be stripped of this connection to the deep and to the sacred, and to truth, whether painful or happy, all of these things. And so I do think that when people enter into these specific moments, like the death of Her late Majesty, or whatever. I mean, there's many times in our lives where we touch these things, and it's extraordinary, especially to a cynical modern, how powerful they are. And as you say, people move to tears. I mean, I'm very easily moved to tears, especially by sort of beautiful and profound things. I mean, paintings do it. Music does it. Literature does it to me. I mean, just nature does it to me. So, um, so I've always skirted closer, closer to that line than perhaps some um, sort of normal person who's a bit ground down by modernity. But yeah.
I mean, there's so many avenues I want to explore with what you've just said, but one of them is so on to that last point. You know, you've you've said that you've had this kind of um, this reaction to art, perhaps more than most people. Is that? Do you think that's something that some people are born with? Do you think people can learn it? And I ask that because I think there's a perception, an erroneous perception, that a work of art can be judged by anybody. And
Mm,
you yourself have seen this on Twitter, where you'll post one of the things I really love about your account is you post a lot of art that challenges, and a lot of art which we might not expect to see. Most accounts share more classically beautiful art, you might say, um, and you'll get some anon saying, "Oh, this is rubbish. I could have drawn this. A child could have drawn this, or whatever." Right? But their assumption is they have the ability to judge that thing and to perceive what's beautiful. And so yeah, I think it's I would love to hear what you think about. Is it something that everyone has, or just a few have? Is it something that can be learnt even if you don't have it originally? What do you think?
well, okay. I mean, I do have probably somewhat controversial views about this. I don't think it is something that can be learned. I mean, I do think that there are aspects of the technical part of, the technical part of the arts that people can learn, and of course there are people. I mean, there are people who are much more facile with certain technical things than I. I mean,
Mm.
that's just a reality you have to face as an artist. And in fact, there are people who paint signage, for businesses that have a steadier and surer hand with a brush than I do. And I do think you can learn some of those things, but I don't think you can make yourself into an artist without. I think that we are given a gift. We are given a divine gift. And again, it sounds a bit. I sound a bit up up my own arse, but but I do think, in a sense,
Mm.
it is a gift. Whether just like a gift for music, just like a gift for mathematics, just like a gift for plumbing. I mean, I think a lot of people are given these extraordinary gifts uh, upon their creation by the divine. And
Yeah.
so but I do think that also I think that people can learn to. I mean, they can develop an aesthetic, and they can develop their own aesthetic sense, even if they're not born to create such things, or if they're not naturally born to understand them. And I think most people aren't. I mean, we have, unfortunately, this egalitarian view that that all men are created equal. Well, they're not, and I often say to people, I mean, this isn't for you. I mean, I'm not gonna. Okay, but go back to Wagner. I'm not gonna take the average sort of pluck a zoomer out of the middle of Leeds and plonk him in Bayreuth and say, okay, you're going to listen to the ring cycle and expect that to really do anything. I mean, of course it may, and bits of it, as we said, bits of it may get through.
Mm.
But art isn't for everyone. And there are many people who are just totally insensible to it. So I don't believe in any sort of democratic approach to art. I mean, now this is, of course, also contrary to the modern or the contemporary moment. Where I mean, we just recently read news of the Tate Modern
Mm.
completely rehanging its collection to reflect 50% diversity, whatever that means. But that it doesn't work that way. You just get shit when you do that, because talent and vision isn't isn't egalitarian. It just is. So yeah, but I do think, I mean, certainly people can learn about things, and people can sort of come to a better understanding, and it's
Mhm.
difficult. I mean, obviously, Wagner's work was created for a different time and a different people, you know, a different culture existed, which is gone. And so I think all of us do have to learn to some degree, how to kind of interpret that language. But I do think that it can get through. So
Mhm.
yeah, I do have a bit. I would say that I have more of an elitist vision of art, but that, again, I think people also think it has something to do with money. I mean, it may have something to do with money because it gives people leisure to pursue these things, but that's again the curse of our contemporary moment, to believe that money is the key to all things, which it isn't. You know, so it's elitist, but elitist in a kind of deeper sense, rather than this silly idea that we have now of an elite.
Well, I think as well that I mean, a really easy analogy to make, which I think most people would accept, is that not everybody's cut out to be a 100-meter sprinter. I think most people would accept that, and that's essentially what you're saying about art. That it's the same kind of dynamic going on there. That some people are made in such a way that they are going to be able to do art, and others aren't really. I think it's a tricky one. I totally agree with you about the Wagner, and I'll confess myself that it took me time to get my ear into to some of the operas. Um, I would say something like Siegfried, which is beautiful and a masterwork. My ear, my attention, perhaps my aesthetic, my openness to beauty was not ready. It needed time to really accustom itself to something which was totally alien to most of what I consume or engage with on a daily basis. So I did experience a kind of transforming effect just by giving it, putting in the work to get to a point where it could affect me.
Yes, I think that's a very good point. And I would say that that's the case of all things.
Mm,
I mean, again, I believe it's a sort of a residue of egalitarianism. This idea that any person in a state of nature should be able to approach work of art
mm,
and come away with some sort of judgment of it. I mean, this is another thing that also irritates me, is that when presented with art, people now assume that the first question is, do you like it? Does it
mm.
appeal to you? What, did it interest you? Well, those aren't the questions that should be asking. I mean, I don't care. Like, if someone doesn't like something, whether you like it or not is not the question of that great art poses. Wagner, going to see one of Wagner's operas, listening to his music, the question being posed isn't, is this good music for dinner? You know, can you watch this without falling asleep? Do you like it? Yay or nay? Well, okay, who cares? Doesn't matter. So
Well,
yeah, I do think, but and
mm,
you must work. I will say also, the other thing that the challenge is that Wagner is, of course, written in German. I mean, his lyrics are German, and they
mhm,
rely upon both the German language and, of course, the poetics of a German, in that situation, and that is also something that, I mean, I have to follow along with translation, even though
mm.
I understand and can read a bit of German, but still, I mean, I can't, I have to approach those works with preparation. So yeah, and I think that's legitimate.
Mhm.
Now, it's not to say that all profound aesthetic or artistic experiences need that. There are certainly many works of art and many beautiful moments, architecture, have what you will, that of course can move almost anyone, you know, without any knowledge whatsoever, you know, and of course some things are designed in that way. If you take a Gothic cathedral, it is meant to overwhelm the, the sense and sensibility, especially of the people, you know, of the average, quote, average person of the time, of that time.
Mm,
Of course, they still work. You know, anyone who is wandered around and up to and into one of these buildings, you know, it is meant to confound the mind and the senses, and it does with brute force in some occasions. So sometimes things can again get beneath the mind, where it doesn't matter what you know, whether you know anything about it at all. You're just a sensory being experiencing it. So it's difficult to pin down, you know,
mm.
because of course there's lots of contradictions when you start talking about creativity and art.
Well, just on getting beneath the mind, I think Wagner sometimes gets accused of this kind of overpowering domination, trying to dominate you. And Tristan and Isolde is a good example of this because when people heard it for the first time, it was revolutionary. And one of the streams will look at how musically it was quite revolutionary, kind of broke many of the rules of music that had been established for opera and symphonic writing, because he's trying to express love and he's letting that passion or that that inspiration guide his musical creation. But people, when they heard this, were fainting. They were throwing up in the aisles because it was having an effect not just on their mind, but it was going beneath into their emotions in such a powerful way. It was manifesting in bodily reactions they couldn't control. And so that kind of experience that you're talking about with the Gothic cathedral, you can see that in his work too. And one thing I just wanted to comment on as well, because you were mentioning kind of does this appeal to me? Is this something I like? Does it give me pleasure? And I think in the 19th century, figures like, well, the late 18th century, early 19th century, so Immanuel Kant, Arthur Schopenhauer as well. There's this idea of being disinterested when you're approaching art, the aesthetic attitude. And this isn't that you're not kind of engaged with it, it's that most of the things that we engage with, we think of how can we use them? Or maybe another way is how does this relate to me? How does it have meaning in accordance with my world? And everything in the world gets its value in relation to me and how I give it significance. So the rain, it makes me wet. I don't like the feeling of being wet, therefore rain's bad. That might be a way of thinking. Whereas the disinterested attitude doesn't treat the other or an object in relation to myself. It just sees it on its own terms. It's not trying to use it. And so therefore it can just enjoy it or appreciate it for its own value, its own integrity, its own significance. And so the engagement with art for these sorts of thinkers presupposes on the audience's point of view that they'll come with this attitude, or they'll try to appreciate art in that way, and it distorts art when it's appreciated in a how can it be utilized by me.
I think there's agreeable parts to that, but although I do think that that attitude is eventually what led to works of art being put, you know, being arranged on sterile walls,
Mm,
you know, with people wandering through, you know, with an audio guide from great work to great work, from century to century, from culture to culture. You know, it just I think that there's a danger when you pretend that you can be that there can be a kind of rational approach to it all just becoming an aesthetic shopping mall, you know. Uh,
mm,
so I think that there is some value to that, but I do think it's also fraught with danger. I mean, I am I am I have one foot in in one feeling about this, and the other in the always in the realm of the ecstatic experience. And as I said, I contradict myself all the time. Because I think it just depends upon the situation. Uh, depends upon you know what you're looking at. I mean, what the work of art is. And of course that's going to change. I mean, and of course we're all very dull now. I mean, we've been rubbed raw. We have been scoured in a way to the point where our skin has lost so much sensitivity. We're just brutalized from the moment of birth by ugliness and loudness and coarseness, and so I think the days when people would faint, at an opera. I mean, sadly, people are so desensitized that
Hmm.
you really have to sometimes hit them over the head with a mallet if you want to get a response. So that's certainly something that has changed. But we sort of find a way, and I do think that if you chip away from even the most benighted place, you can still find that wellspring if you look hard enough. Um,
Well, I guess one kind of question, and dare I mention his name, John Ruskin, in your presence, but I've tried to put him to you before, and with little success. But what one question is, because we're talking about the context of art, I guess, or the context in which it's made and then presented. So there's problems about just having an art gallery, because, as you said, it's like a shopping mall. It's a work of art lifted from perhaps its original setting
mm,
and taken out of its place. And
yeah,
so then it loses some of its significance. It's not just what's on the canvas, it's everything around it, all the activity going on around it as well. But then Ruskin almost goes to another extreme, and he will say that uh, all production should be the creation of art when it's done properly. He believes that um, the major problem of the Industrial Revolution is it prevents the craftsman from seeking to implement the beautiful into a product, or in creating a product. Um, by essentially the division of labor. So you've got one person planning, one person executing, and standardization, which, because you're looking for perfection, you cannot have that creative, chaotic um, freedom to find the beautiful. So, like, do you think that um, any work of labor can be artistic, or is it only certain kinds of production or creative process which could be artistic?
it's difficult because of course it requires one to sort of define what art is, and I don't know.
Hmm.
I've been I've been working at it for years, and I still have really no idea. Um, I don't think so. I think that there are things that are beyond the realm, or below the realm of what I would consider artistic. I mean, you get into that situation where, if you follow Ruskin to his logical conclusion, then you get people designing aesthetic bog roll dispensers and aesthetic toilet brushes, and I mean, there are just some things that utility, utility, and invisibility should be the order of the day, not the bringing of aesthetics into everything. Because again, I think that this is something that also contributes to sort of desensitizing. There is something about what I think of as art and interfacing with an artistic work that speaks to its rarity. I don't want everything in the world uh, to start to engage my aesthetic sense, because I think that I collect objects. I love things. I love, looking at things, thinking about things, touching them, and there are many things I like that I think have a profound beauty almost because the person who made them, or the person who designed them, or was thinking about them in terms of these things that we dismiss so much as utilitarian ideas. Not that they were trying to create something beautiful, but it becomes beautiful because it's a perfect example of its type. I'm looking at I've got a bottle sitting on my desk here. It's like a 19th century like medicine bottle, and
Hmm.
I've got a peony. I've plucked peony from one of the bushes outside of my house, and I put it in this bottle. And then, again, the person making this bottle, just from this particular example, I mean, it's square, and it's very solid, and they weren't really thinking about it. I mean, there are decorative bottles, beautiful things, works of art in glass, but I mean, this isn't one of them. But yet, it it is beautiful, and I am engaged. I am able to engage with it in that way. So it's a difficult question.
Hmm.
I should explain, by the way, that I mean, it's sort of a running gag that I despise John Ruskin. I don't obviously reject Ruskin. Part of it is a gag. The thing that I've always found um, unforgivable is Ruskin's treatment of um, a favorite painter uh, of the period, uh, who was hang on a moment. Sorry, someone. I think someone was delivering a package. Anyway, yeah.
Okay.
So a favorite artist of that period, the late 19th century in Britain, who was Whistler, James
Hmm.
Abbott McNeill Whistler, and of course people can look up the famous controversy between Ruskin and Whistler. But that is the basis of my somewhat tongue-in-cheek hatred of Ruskin. But I do think,
I
of
see.
course, Ruskin is a towering figure in that period in the philosophy of art and art criticism, and as well as art making, as well, because he also was an artist. So
Hmm.
anyway, yeah, I just thought I'd clear that up, clear that up before people thought that I was just entirely rejecting Ruskin.
It's a revelatory moment for everybody. We finally know the truth.
You
Uh,
finally know the truth. Yeah, and it's also just also partly to
uh-huh.
annoy Pharaoh. So
Oh, that's reason enough. That's reason enough. I I um I have mixed feelings about it as well because I can see some of the strength of his argument, but I think I think Ruskin's strength is talking about the experience of the laborer rather than the when it comes to this sort of question, the experience of the laborer who in the division of labor system is a cog in a machine could be quite degrading. And especially during that period, it's not necessarily about the result for the consumer. Uh, his focus is on the worker. So
mm,
I think that's a very interesting point. But then it doesn't necessarily address some of the issues about okay, what happens when everybody is a William Morris arts and crafts person? What's that going to produce? And we can see how that's been bastardized essentially that in ways that Morris would have hated. Like you get his patterns on all these things in terrible ways.
not
Like
to
what you
not
said
yeah,
about
not
the
to bring
toilet
up
rolls, you know?
yeah toilet rolls, and not to bring up academic agent again, but I mean, he's got a William Morris patterned
Oh yes.
butter dish, which of course just William Morris would be livid about. But and absolutely that's true. Also, this makes me think of it. We also tend to think of the artist as a kind of individual, this sort of
Mm,
towering figure that just creativity and things flow from them. But in reality, of course, many of these things we're talking about, including Wagner, it was a whole system, and there were a lot of people with different talents, with again different angles from which they accessed this wellstream of deep deep creativity that I mentioned, coming in all directions that were necessary to create these great works of art, whatever they are. I mean, even a single picture, even a single painting. If you take, I mean, something that I did, or something you take, like a large Titian work, like Bacchus and Ariadne, which is in the National Gallery. That there were all sorts of people who created those pigments and who wove the linen upon which pictures painted, and who worked the original framing of that picture, and I mean, and who made the brushes, a master who understood how to make a beautiful paintbrush, beautiful in the sense of course, just the perfect exemplar of its function. So it's, and in a way, it's an older way of thinking. It's before this kind of romantic notion of the kind of unitary creator. And if you go back to the Gothic cathedral or to the illuminated manuscript, the unitary figure at the center of it is not there. We don't know in many cases who made these things, or what group of people made these things. Have some general idea, but the individual was not even important in depending upon the type of artwork you're talking about. So I think in our moment we tend to think of the great man, the great artist at the center of it all, but that isn't the only value of it. Obviously, sometimes that role should disappear, because of course the work was meant to be for the glory of God, or for the adoration of a monarch, or what have you. So that's something to think about as well. And I would say that it is in the 18th century and the 19th century, and somewhat centered around Wagner himself, that this idea of the kind of great unitary artist sort of was formed. And Wagner, of course, wanted to cultivate that.
He did, and I think that's a very good point, that he becomes this sort of towering celebrity figure, especially when he gets his patronage from Ludwig, the King of Bavaria, or Duke of Bavaria, and he becomes the center of the artistic community, and everybody's reacting to him, and pretty much composing after that point is, we want to move beyond Wagner, but it's seeing him as the center point. But you're totally right, because if we look at, I'll give you two examples of contemporaries influencing Wagner in very important ways. One of them, the brothers Grimm, particularly Jacob Grimm, his writings upon German mythology, Wagner read extensively, and they informed the ring cycle no end. Many of the names, so for example, Wotan, that comes from Grimm's list of names. He reasoned that would be the Germanic form of Odin. But with Grimm, there's perhaps a more important insight, which is that in his view, language has the primordial languages of humanity. They reference the object, but always with the subjective experience at the same time. So the idea of a sheep comes with it's giving a bar, for example, or the experience of wind is tied to breath and spirit. So you have this it's a sensory experience tied in with its object. And Wagner tries to replicate this with, you've got the prose, the verse, the libretto, but that's put to music, which moves the heart. So you've got the object and the experience tied together within the opera, and he's getting that from another writer, or it's being informed by that idea. And perhaps another one is Schopenhauer, who had a profound influence upon Wagner's writings after 1854. He had this idea that music is perhaps the supreme art because in its melody, it reflects the human will, which is reflective of the will of all things. That you have the melody as it moves creates a desire for resolution, and it moves in all these different ways which map onto our emotions in relation to the movement of desire seeking satisfaction. And this influences Wagner's Tristan and Isolde. The whole opera is quite amazing. There's this opening chord, the Tristan chord, and it has two discords within it. What that means is that there's a dissonance with two of the notes with the rest of the chord, and it needs resolution. It needs to go back to the tonic. But throughout the whole opera, there's no resolution of any chord. He'll resolve one of the discords, but always have another one within the chord until the very final chord. And that's because the characters have died. Desire has died. There is finally satisfaction. You don't get that musical innovation without the writing of Schopenhauer. His idea of suspension influences Wagner so heavily there. So I think it's even with a figure like Wagner, who's this towering individual, you're very much right, Mr. D.
Indeed. Also, yes, I mean, that chord that you mentioned, I mean, music is, it's sometimes difficult to argue with that kind of idea about music. I read The World as Will and Representation by Schopenhauer at quite a young age, and a lot of ideas, or at least things that I came to understand later, because again, there's another example of that you take different things from something that profound in different ways at different times of your life. But yes, and of course, music is very rare thing, which is both. I would say music almost more than anything else. I mean, certainly, I suppose you could make the argument poetry in some ways, but you can play a piece of music to a person that has no knowledge whatsoever of it, and obviously, again, they will have a reaction to it. I mean, because it and yet, of course, there are deep theoretical, there are deep mathematical, there are deep phenomena of physics and biology, and sort of also spiritual, metaphysical questions all going on in a way, going on under the surface of a piece of music. So yeah, it is a curious it is a curious question. Yeah, that by the way, I don't know how well this will come through, but that chord, yes, is part of what you're talking about from Tristan and Isolde. So yes, and of course, I would say that in a way, a lot of people mark that moment as sort of the beginning of modern music. And of course, I would say that there's also something. I don't want to say Faustian, but there are also some who say that Wagner was really the beginning of the end of music,
Yes.
or at least of that tradition of music. So I think there is also a danger, again, for any artist when accessing what I consider sometimes forces beyond our understanding or control, and you can unleash things that will have a profound effect in their own way upon not only the people regarding them, beholding them, but just in the culture in general. So I think that's another aspect of creativity that is worth thinking about. It's especially in the case, again in the case of Wagner, but also where he sits culturally and indeed politically.
Mm.
So artists, there's more power there than people give it credit for.
Oh well, this is a you. It's like you read my soul, because that's where I wanted to take us next. Is that one of the things is, after Wagner reads Schopenhauer, who was very strong on the role of the unconscious and of dreams, of revealing deep truths about ourselves. He kind of abandons his earlier theories of how to do an opera. So the total artwork idea is very early Wagner, and he sees an equality of the arts at that point. And he's trying to take these theoretical conceptions along with various political beliefs. He was a anarchist socialist in his earlier days, and apply them to his creation of opera. But when he reads Schopenhauer, he comes to the conclusion that actually, throughout all of his art, all of his operas to that point, despite his conscious ideas, there is he had intuitions or unconscious values which are better expressed by Schopenhauer, and that these are coming through despite his conscious beliefs. So then he takes this approach of embracing intuition, not trying to impose from the theoretical, but rather following his intuition and letting the art be molded by those powerful passions. And perhaps one of the best examples of this comes from Die Meistersingers, which is really like a 4-hour extended monologue on how to write an opera. You could see it like that. And one of the key kind of aspects of the story is that there is the Meistersingers Guild, the Master Singers, based on true German history, in Nuremberg, and there's a competition that whoever is able to sing the best song will win the daughter of one of the Master Singers, get to marry her. And a young man named Walter, a knight, arrives in town, falls in love with the girl, and so he has to go and try and win this competition. And the Master Singers, they are going to judge him in his initial trial to become one of them. And they judge him according to their rules. One of them sits within a little box closed off and listens to the song. And every time he makes a fault, they'll score it off with a chalk. But what emerges is that they've got these rules and they're very heavy on keeping to them. But Walter's song proceeds from his passion and it's improvised. And Hans Sachs, who's the kind of leading figure, he recognizes that although it doesn't follow our rules, there's no fault with the song itself. Actually, it's a more beautiful song. And he advises Walter, don't make your own rules, make new rules, stay true to your vision. That's what you need to do. I kind of feel that captures Wagner's approach, especially in the latter eras, and why he, as you mentioned, he breaks all of these conventions and perhaps sees the beginning of the end of that kind of music. But it's that unconscious drive or vision that should be leading to the creation of the art, not dogged commitment to a set of rules, which might allow you to imitate maybe previous art, which was so powerful, but actually then falls very flat. Maybe LARPing has that quality too.
It's very, very important. Yeah, very important questions you bring up there. And this is, of course, something that happens. I mean, I do think that this sort of moment where I think that in the romantic spirit, sort of embracing the idea that there are, like, again, it goes back to this notion that when you tap the deep wellspring of creation, you can't control that. It's sort of like the ring in Tolkien. You may think that you have the power to control this force, but you don't. It is beyond you. It's beyond anyone, and anyone who tries to use it is going to be changed by it. And so I do think that there arises at certain moments in artistic history where you get this idea, the artists have this idea that they are in control of everything, of every element of whatever work they're creating. They're in control of the theory and the process, and it's all going to conform to a structure which they have created. And I think that even Wagner understood that it doesn't work that way. In the end, there is always going to be an element of creation that is out of your control, that is out of bounds, that is unknowable, that is unconscious, however you choose to sort of think about it and define it. So, and that is certainly true. Anyone who creates anything knows. I mean, whether you call it just a happy accident or something else, I think it's something far more profound than that. But you are opening yourself up to, again, the unknowable. We can never fully understand creation. Because of course we are not the ultimate creator of anything. So I think that's very important, and I think all great artists I think come to the understanding that you must work with this force rather than against it. And so that may have influenced Wagner's change of heart, and it's something that happened, of course, with all the Romantics as well, is that they, there was this tendency towards a greater unknowable framework over everything. And so there, again, back to that phrase I used earlier, ecstatic experience. I think that there was a greater kind of sympathetic embrace of this almost. And yeah, and there's certainly things that Schopenhauer talks about. I mean, famously, the ending of the first book of Wilder's Will and Representation, in fact, Schopenhauer talks about, he even mentions a painter, Correggio, but he basically comes to the conclusion that when the will dissolves, and that there is, of course, chaos and nothingness at the end, that the entirety of all creation is nothing. So yeah, I think there's some very, very interesting and curious ideas about that. But I do think it's very important to understand that if you're really serious as an artist, you are playing with fire, and it can work in your favor or not. And again, it depends upon your intention, what type of person you are.
Well, I think this is something that I was a bit nervous to raise, but I think it might be appropriate here. Alan Moore, who comic book writer, I think he did V for Vendetta.
Yeah.
He would say that art is magic, and he doesn't mean that in a kind of figurative sense. He talks about how magic was described as the art, and you could see it as the ability to use symbols, words, and images to manipulate consciousness and the world. And he makes this kind of analogy. Take like a television advert, perhaps maybe 10 years ago, because I know people don't watch TV as much today. But 10 years ago, maybe there's an advert that comes on, the Hovis advert in the UK, the tune comes on, and it gets everybody to have the same thoughts or feelings across the country who's watching that TV show or TV advert. That's a very powerful effect. And if we were looking at mythology, we would call that a magical effect that's been produced, a spell that's been cast. And of course, various rock bands in the 70s, I'm thinking of like Led Zeppelin or Mark Bolan, didn't just see their songs in a figurative sense as spells. They themselves were engaged in magical rituals of various kinds and genuinely believed that they were, through influencing their listeners, unlocking things within them in a magical way. So I almost wonder if Well, would you see that as a fair characterization of art as a kind of magical practice? And would that capture some of the dangers of it as well?
Absolutely. I mean, you're talking to someone called John Dee. You know,
Yes.
if people not don't know, I mean, the historical John Dee was
Mm.
you know, was a famous figure in the court of Elizabeth I, and who was an astrologer who communicated with Enochian angels, and he learnt an alphabet, and he cast spells, and he was, you know, the Magus of Mortlake, as he was called. So obviously, yes, I've always been quite interested in this, and I absolutely agree. You can't deny it. I mean, I mean, words are powerful.
Mm.
You know, images are powerful, symbols are powerful. You know, all of these things. Again, we in the modern moment, we've been instructed to deny that power, even as we have seen our world wounded by the extraordinary powers that I think have been used for evil. I mean, you know, I again joking with Pharaoh, but I think the people involved in marketing and advertising, I mean, I think they understand this, or certainly understood it. They understood how powerful these things were, whether they characterized it as magic or not. But it's 100%. I don't see how anyone can deny it, you know. And so, of course, to me, this is as you say, all part of of of, of the system. And of course, it can be dangerous. It can
Mm.
even be dangerous without you knowing it. You can bring things into the world unaware, you know, of what you have unleashed, you know. And so I always caution people, you know, don't be careful what you allow into your eyes, into your ears, into your mind, into your soul.
Mm.
Um, and I think we're just we're too accustomed to just letting anything in. And I think there's some things can have a profound effect, you know. And this is why I think that art, you know, whatever it is so extraordinarily powerful, because I think on some level creative people know they know this, uh, or they feel this, um, and hopefully people will use that for good. But it isn't
Mm.
always used for good. So a very interesting question, and I think for me a really, I mean, you know, again, I had to cast away a lot of my rationalist ideas of the world, you know.
Mm.
And perhaps a bit easier for me because again I you know I have I mean I grew up in a religious tradition that you know I would say is more open to the idea of physical and sympathetic magic in the world, you know. And in a way the mass spoken in Latin, you know, is necessary.
Yeah.
You know, it has to be done that way. The same with the coronation, you know, that the anointing is not just symbolic, it is a ritual, and the ritual has meaning and it has power, even if it seems absurd, even if people say, why are we doing this old-fashioned stuff? uh, you know, we continue these things because they have extraordinary power, even as we deny it. So yeah, a very good point.
I should just say for the audience, we're probably going to wrap up in the next 10 to 15 minutes. Uh, so if you have any questions, please send in a super chat and we'll have some time to discuss it. Um, but I think you're totally right about the power, and I'll give an example of this because I think it is you're you're right that it is difficult for many of us today to appreciate that, or maybe all of us, especially if you haven't come from a religious tradition or have that kind of background where those ideas and values are at play. What one example would be I used to play growing up Grand Theft Auto. I think it was five, one of the more recent ones, and I noticed that my behavior changed after I've played this game. So I started to think more in swear words. Now that might seem very trivial, but I noticed then I stopped playing it for a while, and I stopped thinking in terms of swear words. I also didn't have. I started to be a bit more angry as well, or more willing to lash out at other people for very innocuous things. But that whole game is built on kind of anger and violence and so on. So that's just like a small example of how something that seems innocuous can actually have a profound effect upon the way you think, the way you feel, the way that you act. And it's something that I think you're totally right that we have to be careful about what we're consuming, but also what we're producing. And it's something that I'm constantly questioning myself in terms of this channel, or like what tweets I send out. Is this actually going to be helping somebody who sees this? What kind of effect is it going to have upon their soul and the way that they engage with the world? This isn't just a neutral thing, sending this tweet. It's like a little impression it can make on somebody.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
or a curse, you know. I mean,
Yeah.
No, you're right, and of course, you know, it's very difficult to navigate the world without falling into these behaviors. You're right. I mean, and obviously, I fall short all the time, as I think all men do. But
Yes.
it is very important to remember remember that, and try to at least act on it as much as one can. But you know, and does go back to my admonition for certainly younger people. Just be very careful what you look at, you see. I mean, whether it's posting pictures of unpleasant looking people who have terrible political ideologies, and you know, or posting videos of violence, you know, murders, things, even if you're doing it for, again, in sort of the purpose of instruction or political statement, you've got to be careful, you know. And I think it's very important to bring up, of course, the beginning of the Gospel of John. You know, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God. The Word was with God, and the Word was God. You know, the Word as the as the kind of primal state of creation. And I think that there is a lot to meditate upon about that.
One final question before we get to super chats, Mr. D, is that with the power of art, and then with the you've just said that it's in the Christian view, it's tied into being itself. Like that's where it comes from. Creativity, creation through the word brings everything into being. And we can, we've been talking about the unconscious and how that taps into forces beyond ourselves. So that would, in some cases, be the divine, perhaps the demonic as well, in terms of evil. But this all leads to a kind of question. I think Wagner thought that art should be the focal point of human society, or rather, the whole community in its ideal should be structured around artistic enterprises. And he would particularly have drawn attention to somewhere like ancient Greece, the Greek tragedies. When they were performed, everything stops, work ceases. The community comes to the amphitheater, having learnt the tales themselves, studied them, talked with each other about them beforehand, and then they see it taking place before their very eyes through all of these different forms of art, the total artwork, coming together. And so there's almost this kind of religious festival aspect to it. The Die Meistersingers, again, this is this German city where the community all gather together to hear a singing competition. And this is in many ways conveying to them, in Wagner's view, all that's true and all that's German to those people. And the Bayreuth Festival was itself supposed to be in some way a center by which the people of Germany in the 19th century could come together and witness as a collective what's German and true, what's artistic. I wonder, do you think that art should be the highest activity of a society in that kind of collective way? Or Like, yeah, what do you think about that?
I think there is. I think there is some truth to that, but the problem, of course, is that the human culture has and the humanity has been degraded and
Mm.
abraded. What is that? Again, again, get back to Tolkien, that thing that Bilbo says about the bearing the ring. He feels thin. Well, I can't remember the exact wording. He feels
He's stretched out like too much butter scrape too butter scraped over toast or something like that, right?
yeah, too much. Yeah, too much bread. Or yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And I do think that that is a problem because
Mm.
I think that we have been worn down for so long that it would be very difficult to kind of reimagine that and reformulate that, because again, I mean, now what does Germany mean? Just to take
Mm.
Germany as an example, what is the meaning of Germany? You know, that coinage has been so debased and deliberately
Yeah.
so by other forces, political and forces in the world. So it's difficult to say what does it mean to be British, or what does it mean to be American, especially, which has always been a question.
Mm.
And what would a culture, an artistic culture in the service of that, what would a culture centered around that be like? You know, I mean, I am, of course, one of the hopeless few who just wishes to return. I would love to see industrial society collapse because, I mean, it's not going to happen. And of course, if that does happen, it's not going to be the idyllic return that hopelessly romantic people such as myself hope for. But I think, I mean, and anything is absolutely true. I mean, you go back
Mm.
to Ruskin. I think that Ruskin was absolutely right, and that industrial society was, was just almost the kind of antithesis of what it means to be a proper human. So it's difficult to say. It's difficult to say how that could be imagined in the
Mhm.
modern world. Um, there, yeah, there are just so many questions about that. I mean, you think about, and it does manifest itself in everything. I mean, you look at brickwork as it was done by the Victorians. Even the person who formed the bricks, who manufactured the bricks, partly through an industrial process, and then of course the men who laid the bricks. And then you look at, of course, how that is done today. I mean, all kind of. I mean, they were worried about, about industrialization then. They had
Yes.
no idea how bad it was going to get. But I do think that in a way, yes. I mean, everyone working in a culture, a properly functioning culture and society, will be will be a sort of will be able to funnel creativity in some way or the other to the benefit of that society. But it would require a lot of things changing, and I don't think they're going to change. I just wanted to bring just an example I thought of. One of my favorite um, buildings is called Little Morton Hall. It's a Tudor timber frame building, and people can look it up. You can go there. I believe it's a property of the National Trust. I believe now. But I can't remember when. I should look as to when it was built. Um, I don't remember anything. Oh yeah, you can pull it up there. There it is.
It's lovely.
Yeah, it's in Cheshire. Yes, it was built in about 1504 to 1508. But there is a window um on one side of the property, and above the window, of course, it's again timber frame, but carved into it is this phrase: Richard Dale, carpenter, made these windows by the grace of God. And I've always been. It almost gives me a shiver, you know, to think about that, the profound implications of that. I mean, this is again a man 500 years ago, more than 500 years ago, who carved windows for this timber frame building, who chose to immortalize himself in this, again acknowledging the grace of God for his gift. You know, I mean, this was not quote unquote an artist, you know, but yet that I feel is the sort of spirit that can come into almost anyone, no matter what they do and make. You know, again, I'm contradicting myself in the sense of egalitarianism, but you know, yeah, this is a person, of course, who had a gift and who saw what he could do as a gift and as something to in a way to sort of praise God and ennoble the people who commissioned this wonderful building, you know, and of course to put bread on his table. So very, very interesting. Of course, think about that. I mean, think about a builder scrolling on your improperly fitted industrial window some statement with a Sharpie marker. You know, today I just don't think. I think we've gone far beyond that. But there you go.
No, nowadays you just get a poor mural sprayed on the side of your house or something, right? That's the real likelihood.
Yeah, or an advert, you know.
I think I know I said that was the last question, but one has just come to me, and I feel like I just have to ask it. I think you know, a lot of there's an interesting thing in this little corner of the internet, in that a lot of the conversation is focused on politics. Quite naturally, there's a lot of political shows and so on. And you know, there's a lot of analysis in terms of elite theory and kind of, but at the same time, you find a lot of people who are interested in culture, and there is a significant number of artists within this sphere. Indeed, I believe that there's going to be an exhibition with some of them involved in London in a month or two. And it seems to me that there is a tension constantly between, on the one hand, there's those who think that politics is the most important aspect or the real issue. And then there's others who seem to think that culture is the real issue or thing that needs to be focused on. And then, of course, there's people who will see both as important, and they're important in their own ways. But to me, it seems that if art has such power as we've been saying, then even in a political analysis, you cannot ignore its role, and that any solution, if it's possible at all, which Wagner, by the end of his life, thought even if we have a revolution, it's still going to be terrible after. You're going to have to engage with the role of the artistic, even if you don't use that term, because of its power and danger. Any thoughts, Mr. D?
Yes, I mean, that's absolutely true. But as we see all around us, you know, it's being used for very very evil purposes. You know, explicitly, openly. It's difficult because, of course, I know it's there's certainly an easy comeback, but I don't care about politics. You know, that's what's so sort of funny about, like, you know, co-hosting what has become like a weekly, you know, political current event chat show. But I don't care at all about it. I mean, I care about it in as much as it is the mechanism with which power functions and does its miserable work in the world. So, and obviously, yes, I mean, it is used. I mean, we see it all the time. We see words, we see images, we see, you know, great sort of mythologies presented to us. You know, today is the 3rd anniversary of again, a deliberate use of a myth, a contemporary myth, and we, of course, we can look back and see how powerful that was, how well that worked. So I do
Mm.
think that, again, people understand how culture and how art, however that may manifest, can be used for ill or good. But this is of course the frustrating thing, because I mean, as you know, I've made reference in the past, but many people in our circles, when they think of art, they think of the sort of a twee, painting of a rosy cheeked woman with garland of flowers around her head is the ultimate expression of the artist. And there's nothing wrong with that, and there's there's of course many works of art that fit that description that I absolutely love.
Mm.
One of which, of course, the famous painting by Millet of the Lady of Shalott, which is
Yeah.
thus put into storage by the Tate Modern, to bring out some, utter shite, in its stead. So, but I do think that people must remember that, that art in the broadest sense isn't a curio. It isn't a nice picture
Mm.
which that you hang upon your wall. It can be, but it also must function within our world, in our time, just as Wagner functioned in his time, or Giotto functioned in his time. Uh, you know,
Yeah.
so it's important to remember that, and of course, when I post, those art tweets occasionally, I'm not always putting something up that I like. I'm putting up something to kind of pose a question, or just to make people sort of say, well, what is this? If I'm moved, or if I'm irritated by this, intrigued by this, I can pursue this vision and think about maybe how this would fit in to a contemporary in our contemporary moment. How does this express, or how could this be used, for the political, for the spiritual, whatever. So I do think that people need to think beyond, again, beyond taste. You know, art has to be something. It's got to be something more than your personal decorative taste. You know, that is a component of that, but it is something much much larger and much more powerful. And it can be used, but it's difficult to know how to do that.
Mm.
I'm not a proponent of making right wing art, because I don't know what right wing art is. Really, I mean, you could do something didactic. You know, Obviously, the left does it all the time, but no one cares about that crap now, and no one will remember it. It will be some of the most unloved detritus, crowding the warehouses of institutions, if they still exist in the future. So the question, of course, how do we use art, and do we want to use art in that way? You know, so do we want to prostitute art for, like, for a political campaign, an election? God forbid. All very good questions that I don't know the answer to, but yeah.
That's the thing, though. I think it throws up so many questions that are worth, um, even if you can never get an answer to them, they're they're not just interesting. They're very worthwhile to just ponder yourself, and then think, okay, I don't have a clear answer, but I can see then the questions or the issues and problems that art poses just by asking, should we use it in a political context at all?
Well,
So
I'll give you from a rapidly. I am rapidly approaching old man status, and some may say I'm already there. But in the end, I think that one realizes that there are no answers. That it is all questions, and that the question is the point, the pondering of the question, the asking of the question, the formulation of possibilities for an answer. That is the sum total of what we do here. You know,
hmm,
we're 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 never going to get an answer to almost anything, to almost any question, except the most fundamental ones. And I think that's something that you realize, And again, I believe that this is a component of whether you're an artist or not, to opening yourself to a larger, deeper facet of your life as a human and as a creation of God. So just a little philosophy from an old man.
I have the image of the hermit from the tarot card with the lantern and the star. That's how I'm going to picture you from now on, Mr. D.
Well, I do have a very similar outfits. So there you go.
Perfect. We have 3 super chats. We have C123 for $2, here for the D and a carrot. This is the carrot pill, isn't it? Is that right?
Yeah, this is referring back to the carrot pill.
Yes. Well, thank you, C123. Nordhuger, who will be participating in Wagner Day. Thanks for the great streams and videos. Well, thank you for your $5. And Adami has sent in $5. I don't know if he left a message and YouTube's deleted it, but thank you nonetheless. D, is there anything that you would like to promote?
I think my dog has got a promotion there, but nothing on the near horizon. I mean, certainly if people want to, they can follow me on Twitter. They can watch Unpopular Opinions, which is on Tuesday on AA's channel, Academic Agents channel. And I will, of course, just promote that people watch your wonderful content, including all of the upcoming Wagner Day streams and videos.
You're too kind. You're too kind. But you've forgotten that your Twitter Spaces as well. You do Twitter Spaces through the week, and they're endlessly entertaining.
Well, thank you very much. I should just stop at the word end. They're endless. That's probably best. But yes, I'm joined there by many friends, and some good things are said, and a lot of time is wasted. But yeah, so for the near future, I'll probably be doing those. There may be one tomorrow. I don't know. So yeah,
I think they're just as long as a Wagner opera often as well. So it's good. It's good training. It's good training for people.
Oh no! Oh, talk about talk about an inapt comparison. But okay, for length, you're right. Length and loudness. Perhaps you're right.
Length and loudness, and you have some musical singing as well. I've heard.
There's some singing, all right. I can't vouch for the quality, but there is occasionally singing. So
improvised in the moment, often as well.
Yes,
so
I shall perform the Valkyrie tomorrow from beginning to end and see how that works out.
This sounds wonderful. I'll add it to the playlist. Thank you again, Mr. D. I think this has been a wonderful conversation. And thank you all for watching. And please remember that on Saturday, we have Wagner Day. The schedule is now up, and you can find that on my community tab. I'll be sharing it on Twitter as well. I think we've got now about 12 to 13 hours worth of things, and you can dip in and out. We're going to be looking at a whole range of topics, such as Wagner's politics, his relationship to German nationalism, the musical dynamic, what is he doing musically? We're looking at the ring cycle, Parsifal. It's going to be great fun. So yes, please come along and support us. In the meantime, whoever you are, wherever you are, God bless you all. Good night.